"You fool! I transferred all the properties to my name and I gave the money to my wife." Those were the exact words that came out of my own son's mouth when he kicked me out of the house I'd bought with the sweat of 67 years of hard work. I stood there at the door with my small bag in hand, watching as Grayson slammed the door shut without even looking me in the eye. His face held that triumphant expression, as if he'd just won the lottery, as if getting rid of his own mother was the greatest achievement of his life. But I only said one thing before I left. "You're wrong, Grayson, if you think you're the smartest one here." He laughed. He laughed as if it were a joke from a confused old woman. If he had known what I knew at that moment, he wouldn't have closed that door with such arrogance. Everything began 3 months ago. I was preparing breakfast, as I did every morning at 6 o'clock, when I noticed Grayson wasn't coming down to the kitchen anymore. For 40 years, ever since he was a child, we had always eaten breakfast together before he left for work. It was our special time, but now he was leaving early at 5:30, without a word. I would hear his hurried footsteps down the hall and the slam of the front door. For the first few weeks, I thought maybe he just had more work. Grayson managed a small construction company that had grown a lot in recent years. But then the late arrivals started, very late arrivals. Sometimes he wouldn't get home until after 11 at night, smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine or Clara's, his wife, a sweet, expensive scent that lingered in the air of the entryway. One night I waited up for him. When he finally arrived, he carried a small bag from a downtown jewelry store. "For Clara?" I asked with a smile. "Yes, Mom, for Clara," he replied without looking at me, taking the stairs 2 at a time. But I knew Clara had been at her sister's house all week, taking care of her sick mother. I knew because she called me every day to tell me how her mom was doing. The next day, after Grayson left for work, I went up to his room. I'm not proud of this, but a mother knows when something isn't right. The jewelry bag was in his nightstand drawer, empty. I searched the entire room and found no new jewelry, not for Clara or anyone. But I did find something else. Papers, many papers hidden under the mattress. They were property transfer documents, documents with my forged signature, documents that showed Grayson had been selling my land, the beach house I bought when I worked cleaning offices, the small apartment I rented for years to have extra income. Everything was there in black and white. My own son had been systematically stealing from me. My hands trembled as I read the numbers. Over $200,000 in properties transferred to his name in the last 6 months. $200,000 that I had saved penny by penny, working since I was 14, selling food on weekends, sewing clothes at night, cleaning other people's houses so he could study, so he could have a better life than mine. But what hurt me most weren't the numbers. It was seeing my own signature forged again and again. Grayson had practiced my handwriting. He had studied every curve, every line of my script to be able to legally rob me. My own son, whom I had raised alone after his father abandoned us, had been planning this for months. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen drinking chamomile tea, staring out the window. When Grayson came home late again, I was still there. "Mom, why aren't you sleeping?" he asked with that fake voice of concern. "I'm just thinking, my son," I replied, "thinking about a lot of things." The following days were an act. I pretended to be the naive mother I'd always been, while he pretended to be the loving son. But I watched everything. Every quiet phone call he made, every paper he hid, every lie he told me. Grayson thought he was so smart, but he had forgotten something important. I had been his mother for 43 years. I knew him better than anyone in this world. A week later, I found more documents, this time bank statements showing he had emptied my savings account. All $60,000 I had saved for emergencies, for my medicines, so I wouldn't be a burden to anyone in my old age. Everything was gone, transferred to a joint account with his wife. It was then that I understood the magnitude of his betrayal. It wasn't just greed. It was a calculated plan to leave me with nothing, to make me completely dependent on him, so I would have no choice but to accept whatever he decided to do with me. But Grayson made a mistake, a very big mistake. He thought that because I was old, because I was a woman, because I was his mother, I would be easy to manipulate. He didn't know that I had also been making plans. What Grayson didn't know was that I had started preparing for this long before he even thought of betraying me. Ever since his father died 15 years ago, I knew that someday I might be alone, vulnerable. A woman my age, without a college education, without a large pension, is always in danger. But I wasn't going to be one of those women who end up begging their own children for charity. It all started when Grayson married that woman 8 years ago. From the very first day, Clara looked at me as if I were an obstacle in her path to marital bliss. She didn't greet me when she came home. She didn't include me in conversations, and she always had an excuse for Grayson not to spend time with me. At first, I thought it was just the normal nerves of a new daughter-in-law, but over time I understood it was something deeper. She wanted to eliminate me from the equation. It was then that I began to silently move my pieces. Every month, when I collected my small $500 pension, I set aside $250. I hid them in places neither Grayson nor Clara knew about. Under the loose floorboards in my bedroom, inside old books they never opened, in a small safe I had installed in the basement without anyone noticing. For 8 years I did this religiously. $24,000 they never knew existed, but money was only part of the plan. I also started studying. Yes, at 67 years old I was studying. Every Tuesday and Thursday I went to a free financial literacy class for seniors at the community center. I told them I was going to the doctor, but in reality I was learning about inheritance laws, about asset protection, about the rights I had as a property owner. That's where I met Leonard Vance, a 65-year-old retired accountant who taught volunteer classes. Leonard had seen many cases like mine. Families taking advantage of older adults, children stealing from their parents, thinking they would never find out. He taught me something very valuable. Antonia, in this world, information is power, and you have more information about your own son than he thinks. With Leonard's help, I opened a bank account at a different bank, one Grayson had never set foot in. There, I deposited all my hidden money. But more importantly, Leonard helped me obtain certified copies of all my property documents. The originals, not the forgeries Grayson had made. It turns out that to forge a property transfer, you need more than just a signature. You need notarization, witnesses, official seals, things Grayson had tried to fake but poorly. "Your son is ambitious, but he's not very smart," Leonard told me after reviewing the papers I had found. "These documents have no legal validity. No judge would accept them. But the problem is, he's using them to get loans, to sell properties that technically are still yours." That information gave me a strange sense of calm. My properties were still legally mine, but Grayson was using them as collateral for his businesses. He had gotten into debt, thinking that if something went wrong, he could use my assets to pay. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse, but I needed more information. I needed to know exactly what he was doing with my money, who he was sleeping with, and what his true plans for me were. That's where I made the mistake of underestimating Clara. One afternoon while Grayson was at work, Clara came home early. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner as usual when she sat down at the table and said something that made my blood run cold. "Antonia, we need to talk." Her tone wasn't the usual. There was no calculated coldness, no dismissive indifference. There was something different, something that dangerously resembled compassion. "I know what Grayson is doing," she said bluntly. "I know he's forging documents. I know he's emptying your accounts, and I know he's planning to kick you out of this house." I was paralyzed. For 8 years, I had seen Clara as my enemy, as the woman who had come to steal my son and turn him into a stranger. But there she was, sitting in my kitchen, confessing that she knew everything about her own husband's betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, unable to hide the distrust in my voice. "Because I'm also part of his plans," she replied with a bitter smile. "Grayson believes that once he gets rid of you, he'll be able to control me too. He thinks I'm going to stay quiet while he spends all the money on his mistress. That's when I realized I had been misreading the situation all these years. Clara didn't hate me because she wanted to eliminate me. Clara hated me because she knew that as long as I was in the house, Grayson would have to keep up appearances. He'd have to pretend to be a good son, a good husband, but once he kicked me out, he would feel free to do whatever he wanted. He has another woman, Clara continued, a 25-year-old secretary from his office. He buys her jewelry, pays for her apartment, promised her he would divorce me as soon as he resolved the problem with his mother. The puzzle pieces began to fit together. The perfumes, the late nights, the mysterious jewelry. Grayson wasn't just stealing from me, he was using my money to support another woman while planning to get rid of both his wife and his mother. "Do you have proof of this?" I asked. Clara smiled for the first time since I'd known her, a genuine, complicit smile. "Antonia, I've been preparing for this just as long as you have. I have photos, I have recordings of phone conversations, I have hotel receipts, I have copies of all his bank movements. The difference is, I did have access to his computers, his phone, his accounts." At that moment, I understood I hadn't been alone in this battle. All these years, while I prepared to protect myself from Grayson, Clara had been preparing to protect herself from him too. Two women, two different generations, but with the same enemy. "What do you propose?" I asked. "That we work together. You have the legal documents that prove he's committing fraud. I have the evidence of infidelity and embezzlement. Together, we can destroy him before he destroys us." For the first time in months, I felt something akin to hope. The conversation with Clara changed everything. For 3 days, we couldn't talk openly because Grayson was more present in the house, as if he sensed something was happening. But Clara was smarter than I had thought. On Friday morning, when Grayson left for work, she faked a headache and stayed home. "Antonia, come here. I want to show you something," she called from the living room. When I arrived, her laptop was open and a small recorder lay on the table. "Last night, I recorded a phone conversation between Grayson and that woman. You need to hear this." She pressed play, and my son's voice filled the room. But it wasn't the voice of the Grayson I knew. It was softer, more intimate, a voice he had never used with me or Clara. "My love, everything is almost ready," he was saying. "This week, I'm finishing transferring the old lady's last properties, and next Monday I'm kicking her out of the house. I'm going to tell her she can't live alone anymore, that it's for her own good." The woman's laughter on the other end of the line made me nauseous. "And what are you going to do with Clara?" she asked, with that sharp voice young women have when they think they've won something. "Clara's more complicated, but once I get rid of my mother, I'll have total control over all the money. Clara will have no choice but to accept the divorce with whatever I offer her or end up with nothing. And if she gets difficult, look, Luciana, my mother is old and alone. Clara has no family here and no money of her own. Both of them depend completely on me. Once I move the old lady into a cheap nursing home and tell Clara to either accept the divorce or end up on the street, both of them will do whatever I say." I had to sit down. My legs trembled, and for a moment I thought I would faint. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the coldness with which he spoke of me, as if I were an object, a problem to be solved. The old lady, he had called me the old lady after 43 years of sacrifices, of sleepless nights when he was sick, of working 3 jobs to pay for his college. I was simply the old lady who needed to be removed. Clara stopped the recording and looked at me with a mixture of compassion and determination. "There's more, much more, but I think you understand his plan now." "How long have you known all this?" I asked, still trembling. "For 6 months now. At first I thought it was just an affair, something that would pass. But when I started checking the bank statements, when I saw he was forging your documents, I understood this was much more serious." Clara opened a folder on her computer full of files. Photos of Grayson entering and leaving hotels with that woman, Luciana. Screenshots of bank transfers. Copies of emails where he promised to buy her a new car, pay for a trip to Europe, rent her a bigger apartment, all with money he had stolen from my accounts. Look at this, she said, pointing to a spreadsheet. In the last 6 months, your son has spent over $30,000 on that woman. Hotels, jewelry, clothes. He even paid for her cosmetic surgery, all while you and I were eating beans to save money at home. Rage began to replace the pain. I had been limiting my expenses, buying the cheapest meat, turning off lights to save electricity, while my own son was spending my money on his mistress's whims. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. Because I thought you wouldn't believe me. For 8 years, you and I have treated each other like strangers, like enemies. I thought if I told you Grayson was stealing from you, you'd think I was manipulating him to steal. She was right. If Clara had told me this 6 months ago, I probably would have thought it was a lie to cause trouble between Grayson and me. The irony was that my own distrust of her had protected Grayson all this time. But what convinced me that I had to talk to you was this, she continued, opening another file. It was a legal document, a power of attorney authorizing Grayson to make medical decisions for me in case I was declared mentally incapacitated. He already spoke with a private doctor, Clara explained, a doctor who, for $500, is willing to sign a certificate saying you have senile dementia. The plan is for him to give you a medical exam next week, declare you can't make decisions for yourself, and use this document to institutionalize you in a public nursing home while he sells all your properties. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just theft. It was a plan to declare me insane, to lock me up somewhere where no one could hear my protests, while he completely took over everything I had worked for my entire life. How did you get this document? I asked. I found it on his computer. Grayson isn't very careful with his passwords. He uses your birth date for everything. Clara laughed bitterly. Even to plan your destruction, he uses information about you. I remained silent for several minutes, processing all the information. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was setting a trap that would leave me completely defenseless, without money, without a home, without dignity, and worst of all, he was doing it with a smile, pretending he loved me, that he cared about me. Clara, I also have information he doesn't know I have, I finally said, and I have hidden money he'll never find. But I need to know something. If we work together on this, what do you want in return? She looked me directly in the eyes. I want half of everything he has, half of his bank accounts, half of his company, half of everything. And I want him to know that he lost because he underestimated 2 women he thought were stupid. And what about me? You'll get everything back, plus interest, plus damages, and Grayson will learn that stealing from his mother was the worst decision of his life. For the first time in months, I smiled, a smile I hadn't felt since before this whole nightmare began. Clara, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. That afternoon, while Grayson was at work, Clara and I began to plan our revenge. We had a week before he tried to execute his plan, a week to prepare our counteroffensive. But what neither of us knew was that Grayson was also planning to accelerate his movements. That very night, when he came home, he had a smile I hadn't seen in years. A smile of someone who believes they have already won the game. Mom, he said during dinner, tomorrow we need to talk about some important things, about your future. Clara and I exchanged a quick glance. The moment had arrived sooner than we expected. That night I couldn't sleep. Grayson's words repeated in my head like an annoying song. About your future. As if my future were something he could decide, as if I were a child who needed someone else to plan her life. But I was no longer the same woman I was 6 months ago. I was no longer the naive mother who believed her son would always protect her. At 5 a.m, I got up and called Leonard. I knew he was an early riser because he had told me in our classes. Leonard, it's Antonia. I need to see you today. It's urgent. What happened, Antonia? Did your son make a move? He's going to make his move today. I need you to come with me to do something I should have done months ago. We met at 7 in the morning at a coffee shop near downtown. Leonard arrived with a folder full of documents and that serious expression he wore when talking about important things. "Antonia, are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back." "Leonard, my son is going to declare me insane today and lock me in a nursing home to take all my money. If I don't do this now, tomorrow I won't be able to." Our first stop was the bank. My bank, not Grayson's. I wanted to make sure my accounts were completely protected before he tried to make any moves. The manager, an older man named Charles Hayes, received us in his private office. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "Leonard explained your situation to me over the phone. We want to help you, but we need to do this legally." I signed several documents. The most important one required my physical presence and a second signature for any transaction over $100. No power of attorney, no medical certificate, nothing could override this. Only I, in person, with my identification, could move my money. "And if someone presents documents saying I'm mentally incapacitated?" I asked. "Madam, you are here speaking clearly, making rational decisions, signing complex documents. We have all of this recorded on security video with date and time. Any doctor who says you cannot make decisions after today will have to explain how it's possible that you were perfectly lucid this morning." The second stop was the office of an attorney Leonard knew. Paul Reynolds was a man in his 50s who specialized in cases of financial abuse against older adults. His office was filled with certificates and photographs with important people. It reassured me to see he was someone serious. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "your case is more common than you think. Every month I see 3 or 4 similar cases. Children who think their parents are too old to make decisions, who take advantage of their trust, who falsify documents." I showed him all the evidence I had collected. The documents with my forged signature, the bank movements, the illegal transfers. Paul reviewed everything carefully, taking notes in a yellow notepad. "This is document fraud, misappropriation, and possibly extortion. Your son could face between 5 and 10 years in prison if we decide to press criminal charges." "I don't want to put him in jail," I said quickly. "I just want to get my money and my dignity back." "I understand, madam, but he doesn't know that, and that's going to be our advantage in the negotiation." Paul explained the plan. He was going to prepare a complete civil lawsuit with all the evidence, ready to file at any moment. He was also going to prepare an equally complete criminal complaint, but we weren't going to file anything yet. We would wait for Grayson to make his move, and then we would confront him with everything. "How much will this cost?" I asked. $2,000 up front and 20% of what we recover. But if we don't recover anything, you pay nothing more. I signed the contract without hesitation. $2,000 was a lot of money for me, but it was an investment in my future, in my freedom. The third stop was the most important. We went to the county recorder's office. That's where Grayson had been filing his forged documents to transfer my properties to his name. But Leonard had discovered something very interesting. "Antonia, your son made a very big mistake. To transfer a property, you need the original documents. The ones he presented are copies with forged signatures. The transfers are not legal." The clerk at the recorder's office, a woman named Martha Jones, reviewed all my original documents. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "according to our records, you are still the legal owner of all these properties. The transfers that appear in Grayson Reed's name were made with documents that we now see are forged. Does that mean I can cancel those transfers? Not only can you cancel them, you must cancel them, and you must file a complaint for document forgery." I signed all the necessary papers. In an hour, all the false transfers were annulled. My properties officially returned to my name. But more importantly, there was now an official record that Grayson had presented forged documents. When we finished at the recorder's office, it was already 2 in the afternoon. Leonard drove me back home in his car. "Antonia, are you ready for what's coming? Your son is going to be furious when he discovers he can't use your properties as collateral for his debts." "Leonard, I am more ready for this than I have been for anything in my life." When I arrived home, Grayson was already there. His car was in the driveway, and I could hear voices from the kitchen. I entered through the front door and walked towards the kitchen. Grayson was sitting at the table with Clara, and papers were scattered everywhere. "Ah, Mom, good thing you're here," he said with that fake smile he had perfected. "We were talking about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Yes, Mom. Clara and I are worried about you. We've noticed that lately you've been a little confused, that you forget things, that sometimes you don't know what day it is." Clara looked at me with wide eyes, as if telling me to play along. "It's true, Antonia. Yesterday you asked me 3 times what day it was." "That's why," Grayson continued, "we've decided it would be better for you to live in a place where they can take better care of you, a place with nurses, with doctors, where you can be safe." This was the moment we had been waiting for. Grayson was executing his plan exactly as Clara and I had foreseen, but he didn't know that I had already made 3 moves ahead. "A nursing home?" I asked, letting my voice tremble a little. "It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's a specialized care center for people your age who need help with daily things." "And what will happen to the house? To my things?" "Don't worry about that, Mom. I'll take care of everything. I already spoke with the bank. I already arranged all the papers. You just have to sign these documents, and I'll take care of the rest." Grayson placed a pile of papers in front of me. I could see that some were property transfers, others were powers of attorney, others were bank authorizations, all designed to give him complete control over my life and my money. "And what if I don't want to go to that place?" I asked. For the first time, Grayson's mask cracked a little. His eyes hardened, and his voice lost its false sweetness. "Mom, you're no longer in a condition to make those decisions. It's for your own good." It was my moment, the moment I had been preparing for months. "Grayson," I said, with a voice I hadn't used in years, "I think you're the one who's confused here." The expression on Grayson's face changed immediately. It was as if he had seen a ghost, or worse yet, as if he had seen his mother for the first time in years, because that was the voice I used when he was a child and did something wrong, the voice he had learned to fear when he knew he had been caught in a lie. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked, but he no longer sounded as confident as he had 5 minutes ago. "I mean, it's exactly what you've been doing for the last 6 months. I know about the forged documents, I know about the money you stole from my accounts, I know about Luciana, and I know about your plans to declare me mentally incapacitated." The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Clara looked at me with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. Grayson had turned pale, and I could see his mind desperately working, trying to understand how I had discovered everything. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom," he finally said, but his voice trembled. "You don't know? You don't know that last night we recorded your phone conversation with your mistress? The conversation where you told her that this week you were going to kick the old lady out of her own house to take all her money?" Grayson looked at Clara with a mixture of shock and betrayal. You're betraying me." "No, Grayson," Clara replied with a calm that impressed me. "You betrayed both of us. The difference is that we realized it before it was too late. Besides," I continued, "this morning I was at the bank, at the county recorder's office, and with a lawyer. All your false transfers have been canceled. All my properties are back in my name, and there's an open investigation for document forgery." It was a lie about the investigation, but I wanted to see his reaction, and the reaction was exactly what I expected. Grayson got up from the chair so fast he knocked it to the floor. "This is impossible. You don't know how to do those things. You don't even know how to use a computer." "You're right, Grayson. I don't know how to use a computer, but I do know how to use something much more powerful. I know how to use my brain, and I know how to recognize when my own son is lying to me." "Mom, you're confused. You're clearly losing your memory. That's why you need professional help." "Confused? Like when I forgot to tell you that 8 years ago I opened a secret bank account where I've been saving money? Or like when I forgot to mention that for 2 years I took financial and legal education classes? Or like when I forgot to tell you that I know every penny you've spent on that secretary of yours?" Every word I said was like a slap to Grayson. I could see him slowly crumbling, realizing that his perfect plan was collapsing. "How much money?" he asked in a barely audible voice. "How much money what? How much money do I have hidden?" "Enough to live decently the rest of my life without depending on a son who wants to rob me. Enough to hire the best lawyers if you decide to continue with this farce. Enough to ensure you can never emotionally blackmail me again." Grayson sank heavily into another chair. For the first time in months, he looked like what he really was. A 43-year-old man who had bet everything on a stupid plan and lost. "But I need that money," he murmured. "I need those properties." "For what, Grayson? To support your mistress? To pay for her plastic surgeries and her trips?" "You don't understand, Mom. I'm in debt. The company has problems. If I don't get money quickly, I'm going to lose everything." There was the truth. This whole plan wasn't just about greed. It was about desperation. Grayson had gotten the company into trouble and needed my money to save himself. "How much do you owe?" I asked. $200,000, maybe more. "And how much of that is because of Luciana?" Grayson didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The answer was on his face. "So let me understand this well," I continued. "You got into debt supporting a woman who isn't your wife, using money you stole from my account. And when you realized you didn't have enough stolen money to pay your debts, you decided to steal my properties too. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to declare me insane so you could sell everything I've worked for in my life and use that money to save your company and continue supporting your mistress." "It's not as simple as that." "Of course it is, Grayson. It's exactly that simple. The question now is, what are we going to do about it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have two options. The first option is for me to present all the documents I have to the authorities. Paul Reynolds, my lawyer, assured me that you face enough criminal charges to spend between 5 and 10 years in prison. Fraud, document forgery, misappropriation, maybe even extortion." Grayson turned even paler. "And the second option?" "The second option is for you and me to reach an agreement that benefits me, that compensates Clara for everything you've put her through, and that leaves you with a lesson you'll never forget." "What kind of agreement?" For the first time in this entire conversation, I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who has won a very important battle. "First, you will return every last penny you stole from my accounts, with interest. Second, you will transfer 50% of your company to my name as compensation for damages. Third, you will sign a document acknowledging that you attempted to defraud me and that everything I am asking for is legitimate." "That will leave me with nothing." "No, Grayson, that will leave you with an opportunity to redeem yourself, because the alternative is that you literally have nothing when you're in jail." "And Clara, what does she gain from all this?" Clara spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Clara gains her freedom and half of everything that's left after you pay your mother." "You can't do this." "Of course we can," I said. "In fact, we already are. The question is whether you will cooperate and minimize the damage, or whether you will fight and lose even more." Grayson remained silent for several minutes. I could see him calculating his options, realizing that he truly had no good alternatives. "How much time do I have to decide?" he finally asked. "Until tomorrow at 5 in the afternoon. If you don't have an answer by then, Paul will present the documents to the prosecutor on Monday morning, and in the meantime, you will sleep on the living room sofa and you will cancel any plans you have to kick me out of this house or to make any moves with my properties, because now I am in control." Grayson nodded slowly. It was the first time in months that he seemed truly defeated. That night, for the first time since this nightmare began, I slept soundly. I knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I had the upper hand. Saturday dawned differently. For the first time in months, I woke up without that anxious feeling in my stomach. Grayson had slept on the living room sofa, and when I went down to make coffee, I found him awake, staring at the ceiling with red eyes. He hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," I said with a coolness he had never heard in my voice. "Mom, we need to talk," he replied without looking at me. You have until 5 in the afternoon to give me your answer. There's nothing more to talk about until then." But he got up from the sofa and followed me to the kitchen. "Please, Mom, let me explain the complete situation. It's not as simple as you think. Grayson, for months you lied to me, you stole from me, and you planned to declare me insane to steal even more. What part of that isn't as simple as I think? The company is bankrupt, Mom, not because of me, but because of the economy, because of clients who don't pay, because of suppliers who raised prices. I was just trying to save the jobs of 20 employees." "And what does Luciana have to do with saving jobs?" Grayson was silent for a moment. "That was a mistake. I admit it, but I was desperate. I was confused." "Confused for 6 months? $30,000 worth of confusion?" "Yes, I was confused because my life was falling apart. Because Clara and I hadn't spoken in years. Because I felt like a failure." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered his words in that recording. "The old lady." He had called me as if I were an object to be removed. "Grayson, if you had come to talk to me from the beginning, if you had told me about the company's problems, I would have helped you. But instead, you decided to rob me. You decided to treat me like I was stupid. I didn't think you would find out." "Exactly. You didn't think I would find out because you think I'm a silly old woman. After 43 years of raising you alone, of sacrificing my life for yours, do you think I'm so stupid that I wouldn't realize you're stealing from me?" Grayson sat on one of the kitchen chairs and put his head in his hands. "I don't know what to do, Mom. If I accept your proposal, I lose everything. If I don't accept it, I go to jail and lose everything anyway." "There's a third option," I said. "You can accept my proposal and work to rebuild your life honestly." "With what money? With what company?" "With the 50% of the company you'll have left, and with the opportunity to prove you can be a decent man." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Leonard. "Antonia, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come to my house in an hour? Something happened. It's about your son. There's something you need to know before you make any final decisions." An hour later, I was at Leonard's house, a small, tidy home full of books and plants. He greeted me with a worried expression. "Antonia, last night I started looking into Grayson's company more, and I found something I didn't expect." He showed me a pile of printed documents. "Your son isn't lying about the company's debts. He really owes $200,000. But what he didn't tell you is that half of those debts are to private lenders, dangerous people." "What do you mean, dangerous?" "I mean that if Grayson doesn't pay in the next 30 days, they're not going to take him to court. They're going to send him to the hospital." I felt as if cold water had been thrown on me. "Are you saying my son is in physical danger?" "I'm saying your son got into much bigger trouble than any of us imagined, and that perhaps his desperation to get money quickly wasn't just to support his mistress." I returned home with my head full of questions and my heart full of a worry I didn't want to feel. As much as Grayson had betrayed me, he was still my son, and if he was in real danger, I couldn't just ignore it. When I arrived, I found Clara and Grayson sitting at the kitchen table, talking in low voices. They stopped talking as soon as they saw me come in. "What were you talking about?" I asked. "Grayson was explaining about the lenders," Clara said. "Antonia, this is more serious than we thought." "I know. Leonard told me." Grayson looked at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, those people won't wait. I need the money now. Or they'll come for Clara. They'll come for you. They'll come for anyone close to me." "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" "Because I had hoped to resolve this without involving you two. Because I had hoped my plan would work, and no one else would have to suffer for my mistakes." Clara took my hand. "Antonia, yesterday we talked about revenge, about justice, about teaching him a lesson. But if Grayson is telling the truth about these lenders, this isn't about money anymore. This is about survival." I slowly sat down at the table, trying to process all this new information. "How much time do we have?" 3 weeks, Grayson replied. "Maybe less. And how much do you need for them to leave you alone?" $100,000. That would cover the principal debt and give me time to negotiate the rest. And do you have a plan to get that $100,000? Grayson looked me directly in the eyes for the first time in months. Only if you help me. The silence that followed was different from yesterday's. Yesterday, it was the silence of a confrontation, of a battle of wills. This was the silence of a family trying to decide if they were still a family. Grayson, I finally said, if I help you with this, if I use my money to save you from these lenders, what guarantee do I have that you won't do something like this again? I have no guarantees to give you, Mom. I only have my word. Your word means nothing to me after what you've done. I know, but it's all I have, Clara intervened. Antonia, what if we change the agreement? Instead of Grayson paying you everything at once, what if you lend him the $100,000 to get out of this problem, and he pays you back with high interest, like a business loan, and if he can't pay, then you get the entire company, not just 50%. The whole thing. Grayson nodded desperately. Yes, Mom, that would be fine. I accept those conditions. And Luciana? I'm done with her. Last night I told her I couldn't continue that relationship. And your marriage to Clara? Grayson looked at his wife. That will depend on whether Clara can forgive me someday. Clara sighed. I don't know if I can forgive you, Grayson, but I do know I don't want you to get killed for being an idiot. It was a strange statement, but somehow it perfectly summed up where we were. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about survival and the possibility, perhaps, of rebuilding something of what we had destroyed. All right, I finally said. But this is done my way, with my conditions, and with my lawyer preparing all the documents. What conditions? Grayson asked. You'll know tomorrow. Now I'm going to call Paul so he can prepare a contract that protects all of us, especially me. For the first time in 2 days, Grayson smiled. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a smile of relief, of gratitude, of someone who had just received a second chance he didn't deserve. But I wasn't smiling because I knew the hardest part was still to come. On Sunday morning, Paul Reynolds arrived at our house with 2 briefcases full of documents. It was the first time I had seen a lawyer work on a Sunday, but when I explained the situation with the lenders, he understood the urgency. Mrs. Reed, he said, what we are going to do today is create an agreement that completely protects you, but also gives your son a real chance to get out of this trouble. All 4 of us sat down at the dining room table. Paul had prepared 3 different contracts, depending on how we wanted to structure the agreement. But before reviewing any papers, I had some questions for Grayson. Grayson, I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Is it true that you owe money to dangerous lenders? Yes, it's true. How much exactly? $95,000. And they have threatened you directly? Grayson was silent for a moment. Yes, they told me that if I don't pay in 3 weeks, they'll start by breaking my legs, and then they'll go after my family. Clara instinctively took my hand. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Do you have any evidence of these threats? Paul continued. I have text messages and a recording of a call. Perfect. That will help us justify why we are making this agreement under duress. Now the important question. Antonia, do you have the $100,000 your son needs? I have it, I replied, but not in cash. I would have to sell one of my properties. Which property? The apartment I rent downtown is appraised at $130,000. Paul reviewed some papers. Perfect. That's our plan. You sell the apartment, you lend Grayson the $95,000 he needs to pay the lenders, and you keep the remaining $35,000 as compensation for everything he stole from you. And if Grayson can't pay you back, then you get 100% of his company, plus his house, plus any other assets he has. But here comes the smart part of the agreement. Paul opened the first contract. Grayson will not only owe you $95,000, he will owe you $150,000 with an annual interest of 25%, and he will have 2 years to pay, not the usual 5 years for this type of loan. Why $150,000 if I'm only lending him $95,000? Because the other $55,000 are for emotional damages, for the emotional stress he caused you, for the months of anguish, for the betrayal. It's a penalty for having been a bad son. Grayson looked uncomfortable but nodded. I accept those conditions. Wait, there's more, Paul continued. During those 2 years, Grayson will work for you. His company will technically be yours, Mrs. Reed, and he will be your employee, a very well-paid employee, but an employee nonetheless. What does that mean in practical terms? It means you will review and approve all company expenses over $500. It means you will have access to all the company's bank accounts. It means Grayson will not be able to make any important financial decisions without your authorization. Clara smiled for the first time in days. It's like putting him in financial timeout. Exactly. And there's one more clause. If during these 2 years Grayson commits any act of dishonesty, any lie about money, any unauthorized expense, the loan becomes immediately due and you get everything. And what about Clara? Clara will be Grayson's official supervisor. She will report to you weekly on her husband's behavior and will receive a salary from the company for doing that supervision. A salary. $2,000 a month for 2 years, $48,000 for being her husband's guardian. For the first time in this conversation, Grayson looked genuinely surprised. Where will those $2,000 come from? From the company's profits, Paul replied. If the company doesn't generate enough profits to pay Clara's salary, then it won't generate enough profits to pay its debt to your mother, and you will lose everything anyway. Basically, I added, you're going to have to work very hard to keep your wife happy, keep the company running, and pay me what you owe me. You won't have time for mistresses or for stupid expenses. Grayson nodded slowly. I understand. And if I manage to pay everything in 2 years? If you manage to pay everything in 2 years, Paul said, the company becomes completely yours again. Your mother will have no control over your decisions, and you can do whatever you want with your life. And if I pay before the 2 years? If you pay early, the interest is reduced proportionally, but the $55,000 penalty is never reduced. That's for having been a bad son, and there's no discount for that. There was something poetically appropriate about all this. For months, Grayson had planned to control me, to treat me as if I were a child, incapable of making my own decisions. Now he was going to be treated in exactly the same way. There's one last clause, Paul added. If at any point, during these 2 years, Grayson tries to do anything against his mother, or declares, threatens, manipulates, or pressures them in any way, he automatically loses everything and goes to jail. Because all the fraud documents he committed still exist, and I can present them at any time. And the lenders? Clara asked. Once Grayson pays them the $95,000, the problem with them is over. But if he ever gets into debt with illegal lenders again, his mother has the right to take immediate control of all his assets to protect herself. We reviewed all the documents line by line. Paul had thought of everything. Protection clauses for me, incentives for Grayson to work honestly, guarantees for Clara, and severe penalties for any dishonest behavior. Do you all agree with these terms? Paul finally asked. Clara nodded immediately. Yes, it seems fair to me. I also nodded. It seems more than fair to me. We all looked at Grayson. He looked like a man who had just fully understood the consequences of his actions, not just the financial consequences, but the emotional, family, and moral consequences. It's much harder than I thought, Grayson finally said. I told him, you thought you could rob me, lie to me, and treat me like trash without consequences. Now you're learning that actions have consequences. The question is, are you willing to accept those consequences and work to redeem yourself, or would you prefer to take your chances with the lenders? Grayson looked at Clara, then at me, and finally at the documents on the table. I accept, he said. I accept all the terms. Perfect, said Paul. Then, early tomorrow, we will proceed with the sale of Mrs. Reed's apartment. We will transfer the money, and we will formalize all these agreements before a notary. That night, For the first time in months, the three of us ate dinner together in peace. It wasn't a peace based on love or forgiveness. It was a peace based on a very clear balance of power, but at least it was peace. After dinner, Grayson approached me. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm going to work very hard to prove to you that I can be the son you deserved from the beginning." "Grayson," I replied, "I'm not interested in you being the son I deserved. I'm interested in you being the man you should be for yourself, for Clara, and for any family you may have in the future." It was the first time in months we had spoken as mother and son instead of adversaries. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. 6 months after the day Grayson kicked me out of my own house, I was sitting in the office I had set up on the second floor, reviewing the company's weekly reports. The company that was now mine, the company my son managed under my supervision, like a punished teenager who has to report every expense to his mother. The numbers were good, very good. In 6 months, Grayson had shown a dedication to work that I hadn't seen since he was young. He got up at 5 in the morning, arrived at the office at 6, and didn't come home until 8 at night. But more importantly, he had regained his honesty. Every Friday, Clara handed me her weekly report. Every transaction, every expense, every decision Grayson had made during the week. At first, these reports had been tense, full of questionable expenses and decisions I had to correct. But over time, the reports had become routine. Grayson had learned to work within the limits I had set. "Antonia," Clara told me that afternoon as we reviewed the week's report, "I think Grayson finally understood. He understood that he can be successful without lying, without stealing, without cheating. The company is generating more money now than when he had complete control." It was true. In 6 months, the company's profits had increased by 40%, partly because Grayson was working harder, but mainly because he was no longer wasting money on personal expenses disguised as company expenses. "And how's your marriage?" I asked. Clara sighed. "It's better. I'm not going to lie to you, Antonia. There's still a lot of distrust, but Grayson is making real efforts. He goes to marriage counseling with me twice a week. He's cut all contact with Luciana, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm his priority." "Do you think you'll be able to rebuild your marriage?" "I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I think it's worth trying." That night, during dinner, Grayson gave me news I didn't expect. "Mom, I've been doing some calculations. If the company continues to grow at the current rate, I'll be able to pay off the entire debt in 18 months instead of 24. Are you sure about those calculations?" Leonard reviewed them with me. He says they're conservative, that I might even be able to do it in 16 months. I was silent for a moment. 18 months meant that Grayson would be free of my supervision much sooner than anyone had thought. It meant he had learned not only to work honestly, but to work intelligently. "And what will you do when you've paid off the entire debt?" I asked. "I'll continue to work just as hard, but this time it will be to build something for Clara and for me, and maybe, God willing, for the grandchildren I hope to give you someday." It was the first time Grayson had mentioned grandchildren, the first time he had spoken of a future that included the entire family. "Have you talked about this with Clara?" "Yes. She says she first wants to be sure that this new Grayson is real, not just an act to get out of trouble." "And what do you say?" "I say that this new Grayson is what I should have been from the beginning, that it took losing everything to understand what really matters." 3 months later, I received a call that changed everything again. It was Paul Reynolds. "Antonia, I have important news. The lenders who threatened Grayson were arrested last week. Apparently, they were extorting dozens of small business owners in the city. That means Grayson is completely safe." "Completely?" "Completely. But there's something else. The authorities are offering rewards to victims who cooperate with the investigation. Grayson could receive up to $20,000 for his testimony." That night, when I told Grayson about Paul's call, his reaction surprised me. "Mom, if I get that reward, I want to give you half, $10,000 to compensate you for all the stress I caused you." "Grayson, that reward is yours. You're the one who has to testify, who has to relive that terrible experience." No, Mom. Part of being a good son is recognizing when you've hurt your mother and trying to fix it even when she doesn't ask you to. It was at that moment that I knew the change in Grayson was real. It wasn't an act to get out of trouble. It was a genuine transformation of a man who had hit rock bottom and had decided to rebuild himself from scratch. 4 months later, Grayson indeed finished paying me back all the debt. 17 months after signing the agreement, 17 months of honest work, constant supervision, weekly reports, and forced humility, my son was free again. But the freedom he had gained was different from the freedom he had lost. It was a freedom based on merit, on hard work, on honesty. It was not the irresponsible freedom of someone who believes they can do whatever they want without consequences. The day we made the final transfer, when Paul handed us the documents that officially returned the company to Grayson, there was something ceremonial about the moment. "Mom," Grayson said to me after signing the papers, "I want to ask you something." "What?" "I want you to be the chairwoman of the company's board of directors." "What does that mean?" "It means that even though the company is mine, you will have veto power over any important financial decisions. It means I will continue to report to you, not because I'm obligated, but because I want to." "Why?" "Because these 17 months taught me that I'm a better businessman when I have to justify my decisions to someone who knows me well and who won't allow me to deceive myself." Clara smiled. "Besides, Antonia, we want to offer you something else." "What?" "We want you to come live with us. Not as a burden, not as an elderly woman who needs care, but as the matriarch of this family, as the woman who taught us that honesty and hard work are more important than any amount of money." I was silent for several minutes. For so many months, I had fought for my independence, for my dignity, for my right not to be controlled by anyone. But now they were offering me something different. Not dependence, but respect. Not control over me, but my control over the situation. "I accept," I finally said, "but with one condition." "Which is?" "That if either of you ever lies to me about money again, you will face an Antonia who now knows exactly how to fight." The three of us laughed, but they knew it wasn't a joke. That night, for the first time in almost 2 years, we ate dinner as a real family. A family that had been shattered by greed and dishonesty, but that had found a way to rebuild itself on stronger foundations. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when all this began, but it was an ending I could respect. 2 years after Grayson slammed the door of my own house in my face, I was sitting in the backyard of that same house, watching my 3-year-old granddaughter play with the flowers I had planted last spring. Clara had given birth to Sophia 2 years ago, and since then the house had been filled with an energy I hadn't felt in decades. "Grandma Antonia," Sophia shouted, running towards me with a daisy in her hand. "Look what I found." "What a beautiful flower, my love," I replied, holding her on my lap. "Do you know that daisies are my favorite flowers?" "Why?" "Because they're strong. They can grow anywhere, and they always find a way to bloom, even after the coldest winter." Sophia didn't understand the metaphor, but she laughed and hugged me. For her, I was simply the grandmother who always had time to play, who taught her to plant flowers, who told her stories before bed. She knew nothing about fraud, about betrayals, about mothers who had to fight for their dignity against their own children. Grayson came out of the house with 2 cups of coffee. During these 2 years, our morning routine had changed completely. Now he brought me coffee in the garden before going to work and told me about the day's plans, about the company's projects, about the decisions he needed to make. "Mom, this morning I have a meeting with a new client, a $2 million construction project. Have you checked all the numbers, the material costs, worker availability, delivery times?" "Everything checked. Leonard and I went over the figures 3 times. The profit margin is conservative but solid, 22%. And the risks? Minimal. It's an established client with good credit history, and we're going to ask for 50% of the payment up front." I nodded with approval. This was the conversation we should have had years ago when Grayson started making important financial decisions. a conversation based on mutual respect, on transparency, on the recognition that experience and wisdom have value. "Mom," Grayson said after a moment of silence. "Yes?" "Yesterday marked 2 years since we signed the agreement. 2 years since you gave me a second chance I didn't deserve." "Grayson, we've talked about this." "No, Mom, let me finish. During these 2 years, I've thought a lot about the man I was before and the man I am now, and I've realized something important." "What?" "That you didn't punish me when you could have. You educated me. You taught me to be responsible, to be honest, to be a man of my word. Things I should have learned many years ago. It's never too late to learn to be a good person, Grayson. Do you know the biggest difference between the Grayson of 2 years ago and the Grayson of now? Tell me. The Grayson of 2 years ago thought that being smart meant being more cunning than others. He thought that winning meant others had to lose. The Grayson of now understands that true intelligence is creating value for everyone, including yourself." Clara came out of the house with Sophia in her arms. Our relationship had also changed completely during these 2 years. From being two women who tolerated each other out of necessity, we had become true allies, almost friends. "Antonia, Leonard just called. He says the documents for the company expansion are ready." Over the past year, the company had grown so much that we had decided to open a second office in the neighboring city. It was a $100,000 investment, financed entirely with the profits we had generated by working honestly. "Have you decided who will manage the new office?" I asked them. "Clara," Grayson replied immediately. "She has learned so much about the business during these 2 years that she's ready to manage her own operation." "And are you comfortable with that responsibility, Clara?" "I'm nervous, but excited, and I know that if I have problems, I have the best teachers to help me." It was beautiful to see how this crisis that had almost destroyed our family had ended up making all of us stronger, more capable, more united. That afternoon, I received a call I didn't expect. It was Luciana, Grayson's ex-mistress. "Mrs. Reed, I know you have no reason to talk to me, but I need to tell you something." "What do you want, Luciana?" "I want to apologize, and I want you to know that Grayson never spoke badly of you when he was with me, even when he was angriest, even when he was most desperate. He always spoke of you with respect." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I found out what really happened, how he tried to rob you, how you confronted him, how you gave him a second chance, and because I want you to know that the relationship I had with him ended long before you found out." "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I realized the kind of man he was, when I saw how he was willing to betray his own mother for money, I lost all respect for him. A woman cannot love a man who does not respect his family." After hanging up, I kept thinking about that conversation for a long time. Even Luciana, a young and ambitious woman who had been willing to be a married man's mistress, had had moral limits that Grayson had crossed. That night, during dinner, I shared Luciana's call with Grayson and Clara. "Do you know what she told me about you, Grayson?" I asked him. "What?" "That even at your lowest point, even when you were betraying me, something inside you knew it was wrong. Because if you had truly believed I was a stupid old woman who deserved to be robbed, you would have spoken badly of me. But you didn't." "Mom, I think I always knew what I was doing was wrong. I was just too desperate and too proud to admit it. And now I understand that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of intelligence." 3 months later, we had a very special family celebration. Grayson had finished paying all the collateral damages of his financial crisis. Debts to suppliers, overdue interest, legal fines, everything was paid, and the company was completely debt-free. "Mom," Grayson said to me during the celebration dinner, "I want to make you a proposal." "What?" "I want you to be my official partner, not my supervisor, not my lender, my partner. 50% for you, 50% for me." "Grayson, I didn't work to build that company." "You did, Mom. You worked to build the man who built that company. Without you, without your lessons, without your second chance, that company wouldn't exist." "And what does Clara say about this?" "Clara says it's the smartest decision I've ever made." I accepted the proposal, but with one condition, that when I died, my share of the company would pass directly to Sophia, with Clara as administrator until Sophia turned 25. That way, I explained, this family will always have something that keeps them united, something that forces them to work together, something that reminds them that real success is when everyone wins. Now, as I write this, 3 years have passed since Grayson slammed that door in my face. 3 years since I thought I had lost my son forever. 3 years since I had to become a warrior to defend my dignity. The company we now co-own is worth over $1 million. We have 28 employees and projects in 3 different cities. But more important than the money, we have something we had lost and that I thought we would never recover. We have a family. It's not a perfect family. There are still scars, there are still painful memories, there are still moments of tension. But it's an honest family, a family that has learned that love without respect means nothing, and that respect without honesty is impossible. Yesterday, Sophia asked me why I sometimes see her dad cry when he thinks no one is watching. Because your dad is sad about some bad things he did a long time ago, I explained. Bad things like when I break my toys? More serious things than that, my love. But the important thing is that your dad learned from his mistakes and is now a good man. And you forgave him? Yes, my love, I forgave him. It was the first time I had said those words out loud, and when I said them, I realized they were true. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bitterness. It means understanding that people can change, that mistakes can be lessons, that crises can be opportunities to grow. My son betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but in the end, that betrayal taught both of us who we could be when we decided to be better. And that, I believe, is worth more than any amount of money. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can write more stories like this. Thanks a lot in advance. What about you? What would you do in this person's shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and let me know where you've heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. Big hugs and see you next time.